Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, let's try something. Just close your eyes for a second and picture Europe. We're talking mid-19th century. It's this continent just in constant churning turmoil. You've got these old certainties, things that have been solid for centuries, rooted deep in faith and tradition. And they're under this immense, relentless pressure. They're crumbling almost piece by piece under the weight of, scientific advancements, the noise of industrialization, and these huge shifts in philosophy.
Yeah, you can almost feel it, can't you? Like an intellectual earthquake.
Yeah.
This sense that one era is definitely ending.
And a new one, maybe kind of terrifying in its freedom, is struggling to be born.
It's a real turning point. And right in the middle of all that intellectual earthquake, all that change and uncertainty, there's this one voice, a voice that dared to say things. Words that just echoed through the very foundations of Western thought, shattering these ancient beliefs, really challenging humanity to face up to this terrifying new freedom. You have to ask, who was this man who dared to challenge the foundations of Western thought so profoundly?
That's really the core question we're grappling with today, isn't it? It's huge.
Yeah.
Today, we're not just, dipping our toes in. We are plunging headfirst into the extraordinary life and, maybe more importantly, the mind of Friedrich Nietzsche. We're going to try and uncover the profound paradox of his existence. I mean, his undeniable, almost blinding brilliance.
Absolutely.
And then his tragic, really devastating descent into profound madness. And on top of that, the astonishingly dangerous yet undeniably influential legacy his ideas left behind.
It's quite a mix.
It really is. So get ready to maybe rethink everything you thought you knew about morality, about meaning, and about what it truly means to be human in a world that maybe doesn't have those absolute answers anymore. This exploration into Nietzsche.
Yeah, it's going to be unlike any other deep dive we've done. So our mission today really is to understand not just what Nietzsche said, because let's face it, some of his phrases are famous, almost infamous.
God is dead, for example.
Exactly. But more importantly, why did he say it? And what did his radical insights truly mean for his time, and maybe even more crucially, for ours?
Right. The context is everything.
We'll trace the intellectual journey of this man who diagnosed the spiritual crisis of modernity with, chilling precision. And in doing that, he offered some of the most challenging and sometimes, frankly, unsettling prescriptions for how we might live after the old gods have fallen silent.
He was really grappling with questions that are still echoing today, aren't they? They absolutely are. Understanding his context, his struggle, really helps us understand our own world, I think. #TAG11. Origins the Lonely Scholar. Okay, let's begin at the very beginning. We're going to Rücken, a small Prussian town. Pretty quiet place, really. You wouldn't necessarily expect it to birth such a thunderous intellect.
Right.
It was October 15th, 1844. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche enters the world, and he's named, quite grandly actually, after King Friedrich Wilhelm IV himself.
Which tells you something about the family's standing, doesn't it?
It does. It's not just a name. It's a quiet testament to their respectability, their roots in the community. Because you see, Nietzsche came from this lineage just steeped in piety, in the very fabric of religious life. His father, Karl Ludwig Nietzsche, wasn't just a Lutheran pastor. He was also a former teacher, a man of learning and faith.
And it went back further, didn't it, to family history?
Oh, yeah. His great-grandfather was an inspector and philosopher, and his grandfather a theologian. This was a family where intellectual and spiritual pursuits weren't just, encouraged. They were almost their identity, their inherited destiny, in a way.
And this deeply pious upbringing, the fact that young Friedrich even excelled in Christian theology at school, it formed such a crucial, almost ironic backdrop to his later really radical critiques of religion.
It's only ironic.
You have to picture him, right? This bright, sensitive boy just soaking in these teachings, completely immersed in this world of profound faith, a world he would later just tear down, philosophically speaking.
Yeah.
But that world of faith and intellectual comfort, it was shattered really early on in a truly devastating way.
Yeah, tell us about that. It's key.
Well, in 1849, Nietzsche was just 4 years old, and his father died after this year-long agonizing brain disease.
Oh, wow. 4 years old.
Can you just imagine the psychological impact on a young, sensitive kid witnessing that slow, painful decline, and then the just, abrupt, inexplicable loss of the central male figure in his life?
It's unimaginable.
And the tragedy didn't stop there. Just 6 months later, his 2-year-old brother, Ludwig Joseph, also passed away.
No.
Yeah. immense, incomprehensible losses for any child, let alone a mind as, keenly observant and introspective as Nietzsche's was likely already becoming.
So much loss so early.
Exactly. And then the family moves. They go to Naumburg, live with his maternal grandmother and his father's 2 unmarried sisters. So it further solidifies this world primarily dominated by women. This early, profound experience of loss and this sort of matriarchal household, it undoubtedly shaped his perspectives, maybe even sowed the first seeds of that lifelong sense of isolation and his deep fascination with suffering and finding meaning in it.
Despite these just overwhelming early tragedies, the sheer force of Nietzsche's intellect, it was undeniable, almost like a powerful counterpoint to all that grief. He attended the Dom Gymnasium in Naumburg, a good local school, but then, because of his father's state service, this huge opportunity came up. He got a scholarship to the internationally recognized Schultfort.
Right, that was a big deal.
A very big deal, a really prestigious boarding school. He was there from 1858 to 1864. And this wasn't just any school, it was like a crucible where minds were forged, known for its super rigorous classical education. And Nietzsche, true to form, just excelled there, gained this incredibly strong foundation in classical languages, Greek, Latin, Hebrew, French. These were the tools that would later let him unlock ancient worlds for his philosophy, Gave him this rich tapestry of thought to draw on and eventually to rebel against.
Absolutely, a critical foundation.
And crucially, it was his first real taste of life away from that conservative, very protective family environment, an initial step towards independence and, well, maybe the beginning of his intellectual rebellion.
Absolutely it was. And what's really fascinating here, I think, is that it was during these formative years at Schultforta that you see the first real flickers of that rebellious spirit emerge.
Okay, so it started early.
Oh, yeah. While he was acing his classical studies, classical philology, the study of ancient languages, literature, culture, he was also deliberately digging into stuff that was considered unbecoming by the school's pretty conservative standards.
Like what?
Well, for instance, he discovered the poet Friedrich Hölderlin, who was almost unknown then, and Nietzsche boldly declared him my favorite poet.
Hölderlin, wasn't he quite romantic, intense?
Exactly. Intense emotionality, sometimes mystical themes, a world away from the safe sort of German writers his teachers preferred. He even wrote an essay praising Hölderlin, saying the poet raised consciousness to the most sublime ideality.
How did that go down?
Well, his teacher gave it a good mark, apparently, but suggested he should maybe stick to healthier, more lucid, and more German writers in the future.
A clear hint.
A very clear hint at his already unconventional tastes and the friction they were causing. And then there's Ernst Ortleb.
Ortleb. Never heard of him.
Yeah, an eccentric, kind of blasphemous, often drunk poet, short, tragic life. But he might have been the one who introduced young Nietzsche to the music and writing of Richard Wagner.
Wagner. Okay, that connection starts early then.
It seems so. And there's even this story, maybe apocryphal, maybe not, of him and another student coming back to school one night, definitely drunk. Led to him being demoted, losing his prefect status.
Wow.
So these aren't just, teenage shenanigans. They're early, clear signs of a mind pushing boundaries, looking for paths less traveled, already showing this impatience with conventional morality and expectations. These experiences were definitely shaping the man who would eventually question, well, pretty much everything.
So after graduating from Schultforta in 1964, Nietzsche takes the path that, well, everyone probably expected him to take. He starts studying theology and classical philology at the University of Bonn.
The safe route.
Totally. The clear intention was to become a minister, just like his father. It really seemed like tradition, expectation had kind of won out, that those rebellious sparks from Schultforta had maybe fizzled.
Looks that way on the surface.
Yeah, like he'd just follow the established, pious path of his family. But as we're starting to see, Nietzsche wasn't exactly one to stick to a prescribed path for long, was he?
Not at all.
This traditional route, this deeply ingrained expectation, it was incredibly short-lived, almost jarringly so. What happened? What shattered that expected future so quickly?
Well, within just one semester. One semester. That expected path just completely dissolved.
Wow.
To his mother's absolute fury and disappointment, he dropped theology and publicly, unequivocally, lost his faith.
Publicly. That's bold for the time.
Very. And this wasn't like a casual dismissal or some youthful whim. It was a deeply intellectual, intensely personal crisis, the result of years of questioning, of wrestling with these huge ideas.
You can almost see it building up.
You can. There are hints earlier, like in his 1862 essay, Fate and History. He was already suggesting that historical research was starting to undermine Christian teachings for him. Then David Strauss's Life of Jesus seems to have hit him hard.
How so?
Well, it challenged literal interpretations of the Bible, suggested a more mythological reading, planted seeds of doubt. But maybe even bigger was Ludwig Feuerbach's The Essence of Christianity.
What was Feuerbach arguing?
This was truly revolutionary, almost unsettling for the time. Feuerbach argued that people created God, that we project our own ideals, hopes, aspirations onto some divine figure rather than God creating us.
Whoa, that flips everything.
Completely. It gave Nietzsche this powerful intellectual framework for his growing skepticism, a rational, human-centered explanation for religious belief. And then, at just 20 years old, June 1865, he writes this incredibly powerful, almost heartbreaking letter to his sister Elizabeth, who was deeply religious.
What did she say?
He wrote, "Hence the ways of men part. If you wish to strive for peace of soul and pleasure, then believe. If you wish to be a devotee of truth, then inquire."
Wow. Believe or inquire. That's the choice.
That single statement just perfectly encapsulates the core tension that would define his entire life, his entire philosophical project. He chose inquiry, he chose the pursuit of truth, as he saw it, and that choice set him on this irreversible, often agonizing, but ultimately world-changing course, a choice that would echo through history. #2, the break with tradition.
So having decisively shed the path of theology, Nietzsche throws his immense intellectual energy fully into classical philology, the study of classical literature, languages, a field where his sheer brilliance could really shine. He follows his professor, the esteemed Friedrich Wilhelm Ritschl, to the University of Leipzig in 1865.
Yeah.
And this move just catapults him onto the academic fast track. His brilliance was just undeniable, a force of nature.
Yeah, everyone recognized it.
It led to this truly extraordinary event in 1869. At the astonishingly young age of just 24, he gets an offer that most scholars only dream of: a full professorship of classical philology at the University of Basel in Switzerland.
24. That's incredible.
It's almost unbelievable. And what's even crazier is that he hadn't even finished his doctorate or gotten his teaching certificate yet.
I just saw the genius.
Exactly. It was pure testament to his sheer intellect, made him one of the youngest tenured classics professors ever recorded. He's at the absolute pinnacle of academic success, this recognized prodigy lauded by the intellectual elite. But even this early stellar success didn't quite stick, did it? It wasn't smooth sailing.
It really wasn't. This early career high, this almost meteoric rise, was very quickly followed by a publication. A groundbreaking one, yes.
Yeah.
But one that, instead of cementing his place in traditional academia, fundamentally alienated him from his own philological peers.
Which book was this?
1872. He publishes The Birth of Tragedy. And in this book, he deliberately avoids the kind of dry, traditional methods his colleagues expected. The super detailed textual analysis, the historical dating.
So what did he do instead?
He offered something much more speculative, philosophical, frankly, audacious. He tried to understand ancient Greek culture through this profound, almost mystical exploration of what he called the Apollonian and Dionysian forces.
Apollonian and Dionysian. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. Basically, think of the Apollonian as the force of order, reason, restraint, form. Like those perfect Greek sculptures representing clarity, individuality.
Okay, order, reason. Got it.
The Dionysian, on the other hand, is the wild, chaotic, passionate energy. Think music, intoxication, the loss of self in a kind of ecstatic frenzy, like a wild festival. He represents dissolution, unity, rapture.
Chaos and passion.
Right. And Nietzsche argued that true Greek tragedy, and maybe even a healthy human life, needs this dynamic tension, this balance between both forces. It wasn't about choosing one, but holding them together.
That sounds pretty philosophical for a classics professor at the time.
Exactly. His colleagues, including his old mentor Ritschl, were, well, let's just say unenthusiastic. Some were outright scandalized by this departure from strict scholarship.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. The really renowned classical philologist Ulrich von Wilhelmovitz Moellendorff launched this scathing attack, a pamphlet called Philology of the Future, just savaging the book. It really hurt its academic reception and definitely increased Nietzsche's sense of isolation within his own field.
So right from the start, he's pushing boundaries and getting pushback.
Absolutely. It wasn't just a critique. It was like a public declaration that Nietzsche wasn't going to play by the established rules, even in academia. An early, powerful sign he was carving his own path, even if that meant doing it increasingly alone.
And while his mind is soaring, proposing these huge ideas that are shaking up his whole discipline, his body, tragically, is failing him. It's such a cruel irony, isn't it? This incredibly powerful intellect trapped in such a fragile frame.
It really is.
Since he was a kid, Nietzsche was just plagued by this whole array of disruptive illnesses. They tormented him relentlessly his whole life.
What kind of things?
Severe short-sightedness, which eventually left him nearly blind. Debilitating migraine headaches, the kind that would just incapacitate him for days, sometimes weeks. And violent indigestion, making eating a constant source of pain and discomfort.
Ugh, constant struggle.
Those weren't just minor things. They were this constant tormenting presence, like a physical suffering that must have felt like a cage for his massive mind. And then a riding accident in '68 where he tore muscles.
Right.
And then he got diphtheria and dysentery during his short stint as a medical orderly in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870-71. That just made everything worse, aggravated these already persistent, agonizing conditions. His physical suffering was just immense, unrelenting, a silent battle raging inside him all the time.
And these health issues were, as you say, far from minor inconveniences. They profoundly shaped not just his daily life, but the very nature of his work. Well, just imagine trying to formulate world-changing philosophy while battling a pounding headache that blurred your vision, or chronic stomach pain that made focus almost impossible. It forced him to take longer and longer holidays from his job at Basel. Regular academic work just became impractical.
So he had to leave the university.
Eventually, yeah. This constant struggle led to his resignation in 1879. He was only 34. Left him living on a small pension and help from a few loyal friends.
Wow. So young to leave that position.
And ironically, these independent years became his most prolific writing period. But he became this restless wanderer, a philosophical nomad, traveling constantly, desperately searching for climates that might soothe his fragile health.
Where did he go?
Summers, often in the clear mountain air of Sils Maria in Switzerland. Winters in warmer places, Italian cities like Genoa, Rapallo, Turin, or down in Nice in France. This nomadic life, dictated by his physical pain, combined with the intellectual isolation his radical ideas created. It forged that solitary figure we often picture. A man who channeled his intense inner turmoil, his personal pain, his philosophical urgency into those thunderous aphoristic pronouncements. His suffering, in a really strange way, fueled his genius, gave him this unique, often painful perspective on life.
Despite that immense physical fragility, this striking contrast emerges, doesn't it? His writing style becomes increasingly powerful, almost prophetic in its intensity, its directness, as if the physical limits just sharpen his intellectual focus.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
He developed this real fondness for aphorisms, those short, punchy, often paradoxical statements designed to make you stop and think.
Provocative.
Exactly. And a sharp, biting irony. He created works that span philosophical attacks, deep poetry, cutting cultural criticism, even bits of fiction. His book, Human All Too Human, from 1878, really marks this new, distinct aphoristic style, apparently influenced by a Russian philosopher, African Spur.
Interesting.
And it was in this decade, as he's wrestling with his health, his isolation, that his most famous and truly shocking declarations start to emerge. Declarations that wouldn't just challenge, but would properly shake the foundations of Western thought.
Okay, let's unpack these pivotal ideas. This is where it gets really intense.
Right. Here's where Nietzsche delivers this kind of 1-2 punch that just redefined the philosophical landscape for many people.
Yeah.
You see, he was developing this profound, systematic critique of traditional values, especially those he saw rooted in and perpetuated by Christianity.
Okay, the critique of Christianity. What was his angle?
He famously characterized Christian morality as a slave morality. Now, that's a provocative term right there.
Slave morality. What did he mean by that? He saw it as a system of values born not from strength, but from weakness and resentment. He argued it came from those who felt powerless, the slaves in a social or psychological sense. Unable to achieve what the powerful masters had, they subtly inverted the values.
Inverted them how?
Well, instead of valuing strength, power, health, ambition, things associated with the masters, they started praising things associated with their own condition. Humility, pity, patience, turning the other cheek. Meekness becomes a virtue.
Okay, I see the inversion.
And crucially, he believed this wasn't born of genuine virtue, but out of resentment.
Resentment, like resentment.
It's deeper than just resentment. It's this kind of festering, impotent hostility. You can't act directly against those you envy or feel oppressed by, so you psychologically poison the well. You reframe your own weakness as moral superiority, and you condemn their strength as evil.
So it's a psychological weapon.
Pretty much, in his view. And for Nietzsche, Christianity, with its emphasis on humility, the blessedness of the poor and meek, was the ultimate historical expression of this slave morality. It was a radical, deeply unsettling reinterpretation, a call to question everything held sacred for centuries.
That's a profound, almost disturbing way to look at centuries of moral thinking. And
I'd say.
then he delivered the ultimate challenge, the statement that would define his legacy, really haunt modernity.
Yes, the big one, the declaration that still echoes today. God is dead.
God is dead. What did he really mean by that? It wasn't literal, right?
No, absolutely not literal. And truthfully, it wasn't, as many people mistakenly think, some joyful cry of triumph for Nietzsche like, yay, atheism won.
Okay.
Instead, it was a chilling, almost despairing warning. He delivers it through the character of the madman in his book, The Gay Science. The madman runs into the marketplace shouting, "Whither is God? I will tell you, we have killed him, you and I."
We have killed him. What does that mean?
He wasn't saying God literally ceased to exist. He was making a cultural observation. He believed that the relentless march of science, the rise of rationalism, the increasing secularization of Europe, all this had effectively rendered the Abrahamic God obsolete in the collective consciousness. God, as the ultimate source of meaning, objective truth, and absolute moral value for the West for over 1,000 years. That foundation was crumbling. People might still go through the motions, go to church, but they no longer truly believed in God as the ultimate, unquestionable anchor for all truth and morality. That belief system was losing its power.
So the idea of God, the role of God in society, was dying.
Exactly. And this death of God, he warned, left humanity facing a profound and terrifying crisis.
Nihilism.
Nihilism, the belief that life is meaningless. Essentially, yes. Or at least the terrifying possibility that life lacks inherent purpose or objective value. Imagine just for a second waking up and realizing all your guiding principles, every absolute truth you held, every system that gave life meaning, just evaporated.
That's a terrifying thought.
It is. That profound disorientation, that vast, empty abyss where divine order used to be. That's the nihilism Nietzsche was prophesying. It's not just some abstract philosophical concept. It's a deep, personal, existential challenge he believed we'd all eventually have to confront.
Because without that divine anchor, what's left?
Exactly. Humanity would have to forge its own values, create its own meaning from scratch. It's a terrifying freedom, a huge burden of creation that he feared most people were totally unprepared for, leading to widespread apathy, despair, a sense of meaninglessness. #3, the mad prophet of modernity.
Okay, so if God is dead was Nietzsche's stark diagnosis of modernity's spiritual sickness, this gaping void left by crumbling traditions. He didn't just leave us there, staring into that abyss, right?
No, he didn't. He wasn't just about diagnosis.
He offered a prescription, a radical, maybe even terrifying prescription for how to confront it. He proposed these two hugely powerful, interconnected concepts to try and build meaning, find purpose in this newly disenchanted, godless world.
The positive side of his project, in a way.
Right.
The will to power and the Übermensch, often translated as the overman or superman. These weren't just theories, they were like a call to arms for the human spirit, a challenge to actively create where tradition had failed. So let's dive into this will to power first. What did he mean by that? It sounds aggressive.
Yeah, it does sound aggressive, and that's part of the problem with how it's often misunderstood. What's really key here is that for Nietzsche, the will to power wasn't primarily about, brute domination or conquering others externally. That's a really common oversimplification, often a deliberate twisting of it.
Okay, so what is it then?
He saw it as a fundamental intrinsic drive within all living things, not just humans. A drive to exert strength, yes, but also to overcome obstacles, to grow, to strive, to actualize one's full potential, to become more.
Can you give an example? Think of a plant pushing relentlessly through concrete to reach the sunlight, or an artist striving to perfect their craft, or an athlete constantly pushing to break their own records, overcome their own limitations. That intrinsic urge, that tireless striving to become more than you currently are. That's the core of Nietzsche's will to power.
So it's an internal drive, primarily.
Primarily, yes. It provided for him a deeper, more dynamic way to understand behavior than just, say, Darwinian adaptation or basic survival. For Nietzsche, happiness wasn't the goal itself. Happiness was more like a consequence, a side effect of successfully exercising this will to power, of constantly overcoming and growing.
Interesting. Not pursuing happiness directly.
Right. And he even speculated, though he was careful not to call it a definitive metaphysical truth, that this will to power might be the fundamental dynamic of the entire physical universe. A rejection of the idea that the world is just made of passive, inert atoms. He was influenced by thinkers like Übermensch, who talked about centers of force interacting, rather than just dead matter. It's a vision of a universe that's alive with dynamic striving, constant becoming.
Okay, so this fundamental drive, the will to power, how does that lead to the Übermensch?
Well, the Übermensch emerges from this foundational concept. And again, it's crucial to stress, this concept has been dangerously misinterpreted and twisted, especially in the 20th century.
Right, often linked to Nazi ideology, falsely.
Exactly, falsely. The Übermensch is emphatically not some biologically superior race or a product of eugenics. That's a gross distortion.
So what is the Übermensch for Nietzsche?
The Übermensch is the creator of new values. This figure is Nietzsche's proposed solution to the existential problem caused by the death of God and the looming threat of nihilism. This individual, through immense self-overcoming, through intensely engaging with their own will to power, mastering themselves, rises above what Nietzsche scornfully called the herd morality.
Herd morality, like conformity.
Yeah, the morality of the masses, the common people, who, Nietzsche argued, favor conformity, comfort, safety, and ultimately mediocrity. The Übermensch creates values beyond the simple good-evil dichotomy of the herd. It's a call not for physical dominance, but for a kind of spiritual and moral evolution. A self-mastery that allows one to forge one's own meaning and purpose in a world where those aren't handed down from on high anymore.
It sounds very demanding.
Individualistic.
Extremely demanding. And you can really feel the almost poetic, passionate vision of human potential in his writing, especially in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where he introduces the concept with such force. It's almost like a direct challenge to you, the reader, the listener.
What does he say there? He says, I teach you the Übermensch. Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? Man is a rope stretched between the animal and the Übermensch, a rope over an abyss. What is great in man is that he's a bridge and not a goal.
A bridge and not a goal. That's powerful imagery.
It is. It's this vision of humanity constantly striving, pushing its own boundaries, overcoming its limitations, its past self, and in doing so, creating meaning and value in a world that doesn't offer them ready-made. And he sharply contrasts this aspirational figure with what he terrifyingly calls the last man.
The last man.
Yeah, the last man represents the end point of egalitarian modernity, as Nietzsche feared it. This utterly apathetic, complacent creature, no passion, no great dreams, no striving, just seeking comfort, security, petty pleasures, unable to dream, merely existing, terrified of risk, terrified of the very freedom Nietzsche thought was possible after the death of God. The Übermensch is the absolute antithesis of this ultimate mediocrity, a beacon of defiant self-creation against the tide of nihilism and apathy.
Yet, as Nietzsche is articulating these incredibly grand, defiant visions for humanity, envisioning this Übermensch of self-creation, a really stark contrast is playing out in his personal life.
The reality was very different.
Yeah, his life was marked by just increasing isolation, profound disappointment, a heartbreaking series of failed connections. It's almost like the sheer intensity of his philosophical project was just tearing his personal world apart.
It does seem that way sometimes.
His intense admiration for Richard Wagner, for instance. Wagner was once a mentor, a friend, almost a father figure to him.
A huge influence early on.
But it soured dramatically. Their intellectual and personal bond, once so strong, just fractured completely. Nietzsche became totally repelled by what he saw as the banality of the shows and baseness of the public at Wagner's Bayreuth Festival in 1876.
He felt Wagner had sold out.
Partly that, but even more critically, he was alienated by Wagner's growing championing of what Nietzsche saw as a narrow, crude German culture, and by the composer's relentless, almost vulgar fame-seeking, and crucially, Wagner's increasingly overt anti-Semitism.
Right, the anti-Semitism became a huge point of conflict.
Absolutely. So this wasn't just, two friends falling out. It was this deep intellectual and personal rupture that left Nietzsche feeling profoundly alone, adrift.
And that break with Wagner was definitely more than just a falling out. It was a major turning point. It signified him distancing himself even further from all established figures and movements, really cementing his intellectual isolation. But maybe even more painful, more personally devastating, was his complex, ultimately ill-fated relationship with Lou Salome.
Lou Salome. Tell us about her.
Well, in 1882, through mutual friends like Paul Ray, he met this woman, Lou von Salome. She was brilliant, fiercely independent, incredibly unconventional for the time.
And Nietzsche fell for her?
Hard. Instantly. Much like his friend Paul Ray, who was also completely smitten, Nietzsche fell deeply in love and actually proposed marriage to her 3 separate times.
3 times? What did she say?
She rejected him every time. She consistently turned down his romantic advances. What she was interested in was forming a kind of academic commune, a trinity with Nietzsche and Ray, a brother and sister intellectual partnership focused purely on philosophical collaboration.
Wow. So she wanted his mind, not his heart.
Pretty much. She saw him as a friend, a potential pupil, an intellectual equal, but absolutely not a husband. And for Nietzsche's already fragile ego and emotional state, this was a deep, deep wound.
And complicating this already really fragile dynamic, driving an even deeper wedge into Nietzsche's heart, was his sister, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. Here she comes again.
Yeah, a deeply religious figure, fiercely protective of her brother in her own way, but also harboring these strong conservative opinions and a growing virulent anti-Semitism.
Which Nietzsche despised.
Which he absolutely despised.
Yeah.
She intervened in the loose Salome situation with a vengeance. She became, quote, determined to get Nietzsche away from the immoral woman, which is how she saw Salome.
How did she intervene?
She wrote these relentless manipulative letters to mutual acquaintances, even to the families of Salome and Ray, actively trying to sabotage their plans for this intellectual commune, just sowing discord and suspicion.
That's awful.
It's terrible. And this relentless interference, combined with the fact that Salome and Ray did eventually leave him, they went off together, leaving Nietzsche behind in Leipzig, it just plunged Nietzsche into this period of intense mental anguish. The pain, the feeling of betrayal, the profound loneliness. It was palpable.
You can feel it in his letters from the time.
Absolutely. He later wrote in 1883 with this raw honesty about feeling genuine hatred for my sister that really highlights the depth of his emotional suffering. Here's a man surrounded by these brilliant, world-changing ideas, but increasingly just utterly alone in his day-to-day life.
And this cascade, right? This series of rejections, betrayals, these manipulative interventions by his sister.
Yeah.
Combined with his already chronic, debilitating physical illnesses, it just pushed him further and further into this terrifying physical and mental decline.
It all just seemed to converge on him.
It really did. By 1882, the same year he met Salome, we know he was taking huge doses of opium, just trying desperately to cope with the torment, the physical pain, the crushing emotional despair. He was struggling desperately with sleep, too.
The opium, that can't have helped his mental state.
Almost certainly not. And then a year later, 1883, while he's staying in Nice, we find him actually writing his own prescriptions for the sedative chloral hydrate, and chillingly signing them Dr. Nietzsche.
Oh, wow. Playing doctor with himself.
Yeah, the tension was just building relentlessly, like this pressure cooker of physical pain, intellectual isolation, profound emotional despair. The brilliant, solitary philosopher, the man who dared declare God dead and envisioned the Übermensch. He was, without a doubt, teetering precariously on the absolute brink of a complete collapse. His internal world, almost mirroring the philosophical chaos he saw in society, was starting to shatter. #4 collapse in silence.
So, the relentless tension. His brilliant but tormented mind, the constant physical agony, that profound, crushing isolation, it finally snapped, didn't it? In the most dramatic, tragic way imaginable.
It did. The breaking point came.
January 3rd, 1889, on the cobbled streets of Turin, Italy, a day that really marks the end of his conscious intellectual life, the beginning of that long, silent twilight. The curtain just fell on the philosopher, didn't it? And rose on the invalid.
A devastating moment. And the exact details of the mental breakdown itself, they remain sort of shrouded in this tragic, almost mythical veil. But the core narrative is stark and deeply poignant.
What's the story that's usually told?
Well, an often-repeated tale, recounted by his friends and biographers pretty soon after his death, paints this incredibly vivid, heartbreaking picture. Nietzsche apparently witnessed the brutal slogging of a horse in the Piazza Carlo Alberto.
Oh, no.
And overwhelmed, supposedly, by this sudden, unbearable surge of compassion, as if all his own stored empathy and suffering just burst out, he ran to the animal, threw his arms around its neck as if trying to protect it.
He embraced the horse.
Yes, and then collapsed to the ground, embracing the horse, weeping. This powerful, deeply symbolic act. This breakdown of the barrier between human reason and animal suffering. It marked the definitive end of his conscious philosophical life. The beginning of 11 years of profound mental silence. The philosopher, the theorist of the Übermensch, just became a man utterly overcome by pain and empathy, perhaps.
In the days immediately following that traumatic event from his apartment there in Turin, Nietzsche started sending out these short, feverish, deeply disturbing writings.
Right, the Wahnzettel.
The Wahnzettel, yeah. Delusion notes or delusional letters. Addressed to a number of his friends, Cosimo Wagner, the historian Jacob Burckhardt, even the King of Italy. These letters gave the first alarming, frankly terrifying glimpse into the shattered fragments of his once incandescent mind.
They were chilling, weren't they? A desperate kind of unraveling, almost like a final fragmented burst of philosophical fire before the darkness closed in completely.
How were they signed?
Alternately, Dionysius and Durga. the crucified one, oscillating wildly between divine power and immense suffering, a terrifying reflection maybe of the very themes he explored in his work, now taken to this pathological extreme.
What kind of things did he write?
To his former colleague Burckhardt, for example, he wrote with this alarming delusional authority,
Hmm.
"I have had Caiaphas put in fetters. Also last year I was crucified by the German doctors in a very drawn-out manner. Wilhelm, Bismarck, and all anti-Semites abolished."
Wow. Completely detached from reality.
Completely. He went further, issuing these bizarre, grandiose commands. He ordered the German emperor to go to Rome to be shot, summoned European powers to take military action against Germany, declared himself the creator of the world, saying he was in the process of having all anti-Semites shot dead.
His friends must have been horrified.
Absolutely horrified. And alerted by these increasingly incoherent messianic letters, they rushed to Turin to intervene. His loyal friend, Franz Overbeck, eventually managed to get him out of there and brought him to a psychiatric clinic back in Basel. It was just unequivocally clear. The brilliant mind was fully in the grip of a serious mental illness, and it would never fully return.
By the time he was transferred to another clinic in Jena, it was utterly evident, wasn't it? Nietzsche was fully in the grip of a serious mental illness. The profound, the incisive, the often defiant mind that had challenged millennia of Western thought, that gave us God is dead and the Übermensch, it was tragically extinguished. The fire had just gone out.
Such a loss.
His mother, Franziska, who had already endured so much personal grief in her life, eventually brought him home to Naumburg in 1890, and she lovingly cared for him there until her own death in 1897. These were just years of silence for the philosopher, a poignant, heartbreaking end to such an explosive intellectual life.
And during these final silent years, the man who had offered so many profound, challenging works, he was utterly unable to write. Unable to communicate the depths of thought he once commanded. His physical health just continued its slow, agonizing deterioration too, adding to the tragedy of his mental state.
It got worse physically as well.
Oh yes. He suffered at least 2 debilitating strokes, one in 1898 and another in 1899. These left him partially paralyzed, further robbing him of the ability to speak or even walk.
Oh, that's cruel.
It really is. The vibrant, fiery intellect trapped inside this broken body, a truly cruel twist of fate for a philosopher who championed the power of the individual will. Then, after contracting pneumonia in mid-August 1900, he suffered yet another stroke during the night of August 24th to 25th, and died the very next day, August 25, 1900. He was only 55.
So young still. Still so young. He was laid to rest beside his father at the church in Rücken, the town where he was born. His steadfast friend and secretary, Peter Gast, delivered this heartfelt funeral oration, proclaiming, with both grief and profound respect, "Holy be your name to all future generations." A poignant farewell to a man whose influence was really only just beginning to be truly felt, even as his own mind had long since departed the world. #5, the afterlife of his ideas.
The tragedy of Nietzsche's personal decline, his brilliant mind extinguished in madness, it was in this profound and really insidious way, compounded by what happened to his philosophical legacy after his collapse, and especially after his death.
Yeah, the story doesn't end there, unfortunately.
After his mother's death in 1897, his sister, Elisabeth Förster Nietzsche, the figure who had already caused him so much personal distress and pain, she returns from her failed, frankly bizarre, Germanic colony experiment in Paraguay.
The infamous Nueva Germania. Right. With her brother now completely incapacitated, unable to object, unable even to comprehend what was happening, she seizes full control of his precious manuscripts, his unpublished notes, his publications. She moves him to Weimar, where she meticulously and very controversially cares for him until his death. And this is where things get really, really problematic for his legacy.
What's fascinating here, and deeply disturbing, is that Elizabeth, as we touched on, was a fervent German ultranationalist and an outspoken anti-Semite, views that were explicitly and vehemently opposed by her brother throughout his lucid life.
That's key. He opposed her views.
Absolutely key. But she took meticulous control over his unpublished writings, positioning herself as his sole interpreter, his self-appointed curator and editor. And in this role, she often deliberately edited, manipulated, sometimes even outright contradicted or obscured his stated opinions, twisting his very complex philosophy to fit her own toxic ideology.
Can you give an example of this manipulation?
The most notorious example, the one scholars always point to, is the book called The Will to Power. She assembled this from hundreds of his fragmented, unpublished notebook entries after his death, and published it in 1901.
But it wasn't a book Nietzsche planned.
No. The scholarly consensus today is overwhelming. The Will to Power, as published by Elizabeth, does not reflect Nietzsche's true, unified authorial intent. He had considered a book project with that title years earlier, but abandoned it. What she published was a selective compilation arranged to fit her agenda. But Zeno Montanari, one of the leading editors of the definitive critical edition of Nietzsche's works, even flat out called her version a forgery.
A forgery, that's strong.
It is. But it highlights the extent of the manipulation. This sisterly curation wasn't just misguided. It actively allowed for, even encouraged, a dangerous misinterpretation of his complex thought, paving the way for its later, much more sinister appropriations. She essentially weaponized his legacy for her own political ends.
And it was precisely through these distorted editions, curated and shaped by his sister's ideology, that Nietzsche's work became so tragically and falsely associated with fascism and Nazism.
Exactly. The groundwork was laid by Elizabeth.
The Nazis, always opportunistic scavengers of ideas, made selective use of his philosophy. They just tore phrases and concepts completely out of their original context to try and justify their own brutal ideology. Figures like Alfred Baumler, a prominent Nazi ideologue, actively promoted this idea of a heroic realism that he claimed was based on Nietzsche, using the language of will to power and Übermensch to serve their vile agenda of racial supremacy and domination.
Twisting everything.
Completely twisting it. Even Adolf Hitler himself, though it's highly debated how much Nietzsche he actually read or understood, he certainly wasn't a philosopher.
Hitler reportedly visited the Nietzsche archive in Weimar, which Elizabeth managed, got his photo taken with Nietzsche's bust.
The photo ops. Yeah. And used phrases perhaps borrowed like lords of the earth in Mein Kampf. It was just a horrifying twist of fate for a philosopher who championed radical individual freedom and the overcoming of all herd mentalities.
And this is where, as you said earlier, impartial reporting is just absolutely crucial. For the historical record, for our understanding today, we have to separate the philosopher from his posthumous hijackers.
Definitely.
It is vital to state, unequivocally, that Nietzsche himself was explicitly and consistently opposed to anti-Semitism and nationalism throughout his adult thinking life. We mentioned he broke with his publisher in 1886 because of the publisher's anti-Semitic views.
Right.
His famous painful break with Richard Wagner was, in large part, due to Wagner's increasing endorsement of pan-Germanism and anti-Semitism. Nietzsche couldn't stand it.
He wrote about it, didn't he?
Oh, vehemently. In a powerful letter from 1887, he mocked anti-Semites, calling them anti-Semitic rabble. He expressed profound disgust at the very idea of his beloved Zarathustra being mouthed by anti-Semites. He saw anti-Semitism as a symptom of the very resentful herd mentality he despised.
So the paradox is just stark.
It's almost unbearable. A philosopher who railed passionately against the herd instinct, against groupthink, against narrow-minded nationalism, against the very values of resentment and weakness he saw driving such movements, becomes, through his sister's machinations and the Nazis' cynical appropriation, a distorted symbol for one of history's most destructive mass ideologies. It was a horrifying twisting of his radical individualism into something terrifyingly, diametrically opposed to his actual thought.
Fortunately, though, the true depth, the real breadth of Nietzsche's original untainted thought couldn't be permanently buried under all that manipulation and misinterpretation. It took time, though.
It did. After the horrors of World War II, and a period where his name was understandably tainted by these false associations, 20th century scholars, with immense dedication, began the work of reclaiming him.
Who were some of the key figures?
People like Walter Kaufmann, R.J. Hollingdale. Their translations and interpretations were hugely important in the English-speaking world. Georges Bataille in France wrote a crucial essay back in 1937 called Nietzsche and Fascists, directly confronting the misuse. These scholars worked tirelessly to correct the historical record, challenge the misinterpretations head-on, and perhaps most importantly, make accurate, critically edited versions of his actual writings available to new generations of readers and thinkers.
So his genuine ideas could finally breathe again, free from the distortion.
Exactly. And this scholarly reevaluation led to his ideas enjoying this profound renewed popularity, especially starting in the 1960s. And his influence has only continued to grow since then, impacting just a vast spectrum of modern thought.
In what areas particularly?
Well, he's now widely recognized as this crucial precursor to existentialism, to postmodernism, to post-structuralism. He's foundational to so many contemporary philosophical discussions about meaning, power, truth, language, individuality.
And beyond philosophy.
Oh, absolutely. His influence is woven into the very fabric of modern intellectual and artistic life. You see it in literary giants like André Gide, August Strindberg, D.H. Lawrence, Thomas Mann, whose main character in Dr. Faustus was directly inspired by Nietzsche, Rainer Maria Rilke, Albert Camus. The list goes on. Psychologists like Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung drew heavily from his groundbreaking insights into the human psyche, ideas about unconscious drives, the will, repression.
Freud acknowledged him.
Freud acknowledged Nietzsche's insights, anticipated many of his own discoveries about the unconscious. And later philosophers Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida all engaged deeply with Nietzsche's challenging work, sometimes building on it, sometimes critiquing it, but always acknowledging its undeniable power and importance.
Even political figures you mentioned.
Yeah, perhaps surprisingly. Figures as diverse as Charles de Gaulle and Huey P. Newton apparently read him, grappling with his complex ideas about power, will, and the individual. He truly challenged humanity to confront, as he put it, the greatest danger, that we might never be ready for the freedom that follows the death of God. He pushed us, and still pushes us, to ask what we become, what we can become, in the absence of those absolute anchors. Hashtag outro. So this deep dive into the extraordinary, tumultuous life and mind of Friedrich Nietzsche. It really reveals a man who, from that early, deeply personal loss of faith, just relentlessly pursued truth and meaning. In a world he saw with piercing clarity as rapidly losing its traditional anchors, he dared to ask the most profound, the most unsettling questions, didn't he? Like, what do we actually do when the old gods fall silent? And in trying to answer that, he challenged all of humanity to become the audacious architects of its own values, rather than just passively inheriting them or falling into despair. He essentially threw the burden of meaning-making squarely onto our shoulders.
You really see, Nietzsche's ultimate challenge was exactly that. Can we create meaning in a disenchanted world? Can we resist the seductive comfort of apathy, of just going along with the crowd? Can we avoid becoming that dreaded last man? And instead, can we strive with everything we have toward that transformative, demanding ideal of the Übermensch? His own life so incredibly full of both dazzling intellectual light and immense personal darkness. It's just this poignant testament, isn't it, to both the exhilarating, almost terrifying heights human thought can reach and the devastating, all-too-human fragility of the human condition. He lived and breathed the very tensions he wrote about.
He really did. And so maybe we leave you, our listeners, with this haunting thought. It's a variation on Nietzsche's own profound, enduring question, one that continues to echo maybe louder than ever in our own complex, rapidly changing world. Perhaps the greatest danger is not that God is dead, but that we might never be ready for the immense and terrifying freedom that follows.
How will you respond to that freedom? What values will you create in its light?